Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Third, and this is a part 2 to the gain staging video that I made last week. I do suggest that you check that out first, okay? In that video, I was talking all about how you can use free plugins to gain stage and how I gain stage and how you can gain stage. Now, there was something that got brought up to my attention, something that I didn't know, okay? Again, I'm learning just as much as you guys. Now, in terms of transients, okay, fast transients, hand claps, snares, hi-hats, etc., VU meters are actually too slow to pick the fast transients up. So it was something that I tested out for myself, and it is genuinely true. So again, if you're gain staging fast transients, so especially, for example, a snare, and you're kind of gain staging it and using the trigger tool and MV meter 2 and just gain staging it to say 0 VU minus 18 dBFS, if that's what the plugin states in the manual, okay, and you're hitting it at 0 VU, you think that's great. What I found out is that you're actually really over abusing the input of the plugin. So what is the way around this, you may be asking? This brings me back to this Mixing Engineer's Handbook. That's twice I've had it out this week. I've had it for 10 years. Honestly, just buy it. It's fantastic. And there's a gain staging part in this book, and it's talking all about kind of like analog gain staging, and again, talking about fast transients. And in the book, it basically states that there could be as much as 20 dB of a difference, right? 20 dB that the VU meter isn't picking up in fast transients. So what it does advise, right, is as a ballpark, right? Again, there's no right or wrong answers. Maybe like as a little kind of reference, thinking about leaving a lot of headroom in fast transients, about, say, maybe minus 15 or minus 10 VU, but again, use your ears. So what I've done is I've set up a really simple test. I've got a snare and a hi-hat. So we're going to evaluate the differences of going in at different levels. Now, in the comparisons you're about to hear, we've got minus 15 VU, 0 VU, and that's going by the VU meters, okay? It's going by the VU meters. Now, there was a few people in the comments stating that I was maybe being a little bit too timid and you're not getting the saturation out of the plugins, and they could go in at, say, minus 6 dBFS, and there's not going to be any downsides to that. Obviously, if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that you can bring an audible aliasing the harder you hit it. Okay, the harder you hit the input in the plugins, the more higher order harmonics you're making, more harmonics you're making in general. And then if that plugin makes more higher order harmonics, you will be bringing in more aliasing. And as soon as the aliasing becomes audible, it's just going to sound horrible. You're bringing in unmusical frequencies into your source. It's just not going to sound great, okay? It's going to sound muddy, it's going to sound harsh, and it's not going to sound like the hardware. However, that's one element of it. And this is something that I need to tell you about very quickly, is that there's a difference between DAW digital headroom and headroom in analog emulations. Analog emulations are made to emulate the behaviors of the analog. In the analog, if you're going too hot, right, especially with fast transients, what's going to happen is you're going to shave off those transients, which can sound like almost the transients are being tucked in and the transients are being rounded off, which means that in an overall mix, your snare isn't going to come out as much because it's losing that transients, you're losing that punch, and you're doing that just in the input stage without using any EQ, any compression. You're shaving those transients off. And in the book, it talks all about in the analog realm, going in too hot, it can kind of make things sound a little bit dull and a little bit lifeless. Again, transients is what gives you that pop and that snap. And you have to be aware that digital VU meters are calibrated to act like analog VU meters. I don't know if it's like 300 millisecond delay or whatever it is, but it's just not fast enough. Now, what's great in the peak mode of the MV meter 2, what you could do is you can go into peak mode, set it to minus 6, trigger tool, buff, sets it to minus 6, because then it's basically acting like a digital meter at that point. That's the great thing about MV meter 2. Honestly, I never even checked the rest of it out. It's free and it's got all of these different metering options. So many metering options. In terms of the 0 VU with the fast transients, it's hitting way harder than minus 6 dBFS. And you're going to hear it. You're going to hear distortion. You're going to hear kind of the transients really being tucked in. And hopefully what you can hear is, obviously, with more headroom in the VU meters, it's going to sound cleaner. It's going to sound cleaner because there's less harmonics, but listen to the transients and listen to the energy of the snare and the hi-hat, that kind of overall energy. Listen to the top end and just listen to the transients. Right, so that is my talking done, I promise, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play all the examples side by side, just all on a winner, so you could hear all of the examples that I've got for you. Let's do it. Right, okay, so there you have it. Many people might say they don't hear the difference. I can definitely hear the difference. I've done blind tests and I can pick out the minus 15 VU every single time. It's quite easy for me because I know what to listen out for. If you pick out certain elements, you'll always hear it. And it's that energy. I can hear there's more energy in the hi-hat for me. And the snare, again, you just hear it. It's got that kind of a little bit of a more of a top-end crack in the snare. At 0 VU, it's crazy how much you are going in to the plugin. It's amazing how much you can be fooled. And that is why if you're going to be using a VU meter, then you need to use the VU and use the headroom. I found that minus 15 VU is quite a good spot. Minus 10 is all right, but I can still hear slight differences. In the book, they call it preservation of transients. I feel that the transients are best preserved, like the original source, when you're hitting it at about minus 15 VU. It's a lot of headroom. It is clean, but know what? Like, again, like you can add saturation further down the line. You know what I mean? There's other plugins you can use. There's some plugins that have pre-modes and saturation modes and separate pre's and stuff. To me, it's just all about how you want your transients. Some people might want that tucked in transient sound. Some people might prefer their transients to be a little bit rimmed. So you can go in a little bit harder and rimmed off the transients a little bit more. But like, don't fool yourself in thinking that there is no difference in hitting the plugins whatever way you want, just because digital has way more headroom than analog. The plugins are made to act like the analog. That's why they have VU meters in there. I can hear the difference in transients, okay? It is subjective at the end of the day. It's always subjective. Me personally, I could hear the difference. Me personally, when it comes to transients, snares, hi-hats and stuff like that, I will go in at say minus 15, minus 10 VU. But when it comes to the preservation of transients, it depends on the specific plugin you're using, and it depends on the specific source that you're using, the specific snare, hi-hat, claps. It depends. I think for this, you should be using your ears, and you're in control, and you're deciding how you want that transient to be affected. Do you want to preserve the transients? Do you want more punch overall? It just absolutely depends on you. To me, it's very good to know more about gain staging in terms of how VU meters work, and again the differences of analog emulations and how the transients can be affected depending on the way that you go into them. And remember, as I keep on saying, right, there was no like EQ, there was nothing in the plugins, right? I didn't touch them. This was just the input stages, and hopefully what you can hear is the more plugins that you add, the more the transients degrade. Especially at 0 VU, you can hear more drive, more saturation, more distortion. It's rounding off the transient and it's not sounding as nice. And that's just running through the plugin. You're losing the transients and you're losing clarity. But again, it depends on what sound you want. So I'll leave it up to you guys. I'm glad that I found this out, and I'm glad that I had another excuse to go into Mixing Engineer's Handbook. Experiment for yourself, guys. I think that's me done with gain staging. I think that's really all that I need to know. So watch part 1 if you haven't watched part 1. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. If this has been helpful for you, then please like the video, consider subscribing, and I'll see you again sometime on Mixing Wednesdays.